right, and the world shall come to him. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. You're looking at the Trump Tower, just a few blocks from us here in Midtown Manhattan, that has been engaging and getting the biggest names all to pay a visit to the president-elect, and maybe, in the case of some of them, get considered for a top job in his cabinet. To Fox Business Network's Connell McShane on who he has been seeing coming and going. Hey, Connell.
A lot of big names. Hey, Neil, and you're right. The world shall come to him as those names and big leaders, many of whom we're familiar with from the campaign, have been going in and out of Trump Tower today for another day of meetings. There have not been any major announcements, although the transition team just put a list out a few minutes ago of 29 foreign leaders, they say, that President-elect Trump or Vice President-elect Mike Pence have spoken with over the last week. I got to tell you, though, the main storyline today, really, from the Trump transition team has been pushback. Pushback against media reports that their transition has somehow been chaotic or filled with infighting. Watch this.
There have been rumors that the transition has not been going well. It's been disorganized. People are getting fired and hired, and it's been going slow.
It that way. It's just not that way. Those are false.
It's very calm. It's very structured. And anyone saying anything else is either A, bitter because they're not on the inside and they're not being considered, or there's someone who's just bitter because the election was last week and they didn't get the result that they wanted.
All right, I'll give you a few examples of what we've seen here today. The likes of General Mike Flynn, who's been a close military advisor of Mr. Trump and was during the campaign, talked about by some as possibly working within the administration. He's been here at Trump Tower today. Senator Jeff Sessions, who's become a regular and also a close advisor of the president-elect, he's also been here at Trump Tower today. And as Mr. Trump takes meetings with those who may work within his administration, he's also taken at least one meeting with someone who certainly will not. I know you'll talk more about this in a little while, Neil, but the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, was here for quite some time today, met with the president-elect for over an hour. Back to you.
That's an hour that Donald Trump will never get back. All right, thank you very much, Connell McShane. All right, in the meantime, to hear the press tell it and the New York Times front page broadcast it, the whole team is in disarray. This whole thing is in disarray. The firings, the whole 9 yards, that it's a sign that this has never happened before. But I look back in history and I felt that it has happened before. And when it comes to progress, getting a team together, Mr. Trump is actually running ahead of history and prior president-elects. Of course, that is not really being picked up unless you're Joe Concha and unless you're with The Hill. Joe, you'd think that he is just failing miserably at this.
7 days in, Neil, we are right now. You know how long a transition goes on for? 78 days. We're not even 1/10 the way, and we're already talking about microcosms and macrocosms. And what I mean is state of disarray, as we see with the New York Times, other publications saying that it's chaos. We're 1 week in. If we're this far ahead or this not far ahead, 50 days in, then you could start to say those things. But the bottom line is that the media did not get the election result that they wanted. We talked about it on the show before. USA Today poll, a nearly 10-to-1 margin of Americans thinking that the media was rooting for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. And now, instead of the media looking inward and soul searching and doing all the, well, we got to learn some lessons here thing, instead they're doubling down. And the good news is, at least, that 57 papers endorsed Hillary Clinton, only 2 Donald Trump, and that got her a concession speech. Bottom line, they don't have the influence that they used to, so they could talk about chaos all they want. The American people probably ain't listening anyway.
I'm wondering, too, about the way they're going about this. This is the first president-elect whose home is in a big city. Yeah. So obviously anything he does, meeting with dignitaries or prospective cabinet members, is there for the world to see. So ironically, in that sense, it's quite a transparent process.
Yeah, we see everybody going in and out of Trump Tower. This was happening, as you said, with another presidential candidate, whether it be a Bill Clinton in Arkansas, whether it be a George W. Bush in Texas or Maine, Barack Obama, Chicago, which isn't obviously New York, the media capital of the world. You wouldn't see every person coming and going from Trump Tower. But just to go back to the New York Times for a moment, we talked about this on your Saturday show. They sent out a letter to their subscribers saying that with the Trump administration, they're going to be more transparent, they're going to be more objective. And then I went to their homepage that very same day and I Control F'd. That's where you could type in a name and you could search everything that comes up under that name. 19 stories are on Donald Trump. 0 were positive. So the same day they say they're going to be objective, it's amazing. And let me just read you one clip from one story, which I found remarkable. It was about Trump reaction in Mexico. Clouds have descended over Mexico, miring in a state of anguish and paralysis after the election of Mr. Trump to the highest office in the world. They are clouds of uncertainty and fear, of self-doubt and insecurity. There were even actual storm clouds hanging over the Capitol in recent days, a literal echo of the nation's state of mind. In other words, Donald Trump, who apparently is a climate change denier, now has the ability to change climate over certain cities in this world. Remarkable. That is the type of writing that we're seeing even post-election. The media has not learned their lesson. They simply do not get it.
It's a nasty metaphor, I think. Joseph, thank you very much. Joe Concha, the Hill columnist. All right. There was something very interesting to see today with all these comings and goings of figures. That is New York Mayor Bill de Blasio getting an opportunity to speak with Donald Trump, and then 62 minutes after that to tell the press this.
I will not tell you that Gucci and Tiffany are my central concerns in life, but I will say the traffic situation is a very real problem, and it's magnified, of course, because we're going into the holidays.
What he was referring to there is Gucci and Tiffany's in the neighborhood, worried about vehicular traffic, worried about walking traffic, that it was hurting their business, and he didn't care. Now, again, these are issues that sometimes might be beyond a mayor's control, but to say he's not worried about it, there was hardly an issue for him. Those are pretty pricey retailers, and New York is a pricey town. Is he similarly saying, I don't really care about all the revenue they bring into the city? Let me point out here that at Gucci, you could sell a $1,000 purse. So with a combined New York City state tax of about 8.75%, about the highest in the nation, the city makes a good chunk of change off that, as does the state. In that case, about $90. So he's dismissing that because he really can't care about Gucci and Tiffany. And Donald Trump had to listen to this guy for 62 minutes. That is 62 minutes that Donald Trump will never, ever, ever get back. All right, the Fox Business Network's Charlie Gasparino on what else he's hearing and who else is coming and going. Charlie.
Kind of interesting here, you know, a busy day inside the Trump Tower. I agree with you. You know, Bill de Blasio is a progressive. He's probably farther left than President Obama. You know, gave aid and comfort to the Sandinistas in his youth, honeymooned in Cuba. So for him to say that Gucci and Tiffany's isn't a big thing, even though they employ a lot of people, including working class people, is, you know, just speaks to his background.
And by the way, he feels the same way about the Wall Street community. He constantly harangues them and wants Dodd-Frank kept in place, even though you could argue there's some limitations and problems there that have haunted that industry. But they're all big payers in this city.
Listen, let's be clear. If you get rid of the banks, if you want to destroy the banks, there won't be any tax revenues for all the welfare that Bill de Blasio wants to hand out. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And I could never understand why Chuck Schumer, who knows better, he's a Democratic U.S. Senator from New York, while Hillary Clinton, she was in the Obama administration, but she was a U.S. Senator from New York, didn't advocate better against the massive regulation. I'm not saying some regulation wasn't needed post-financial crisis, but basically the ramping up of the regulations and the attacks on the banks, the personal tax that President Obama did, allowing Elizabeth Warren to complete her jihad, the Occupy Wall Street support that the Obama administration gave, was an attempt to destroy New York City's biggest industry that was paying a lot of welfare money. Now,
but he tipped a lot there, Charlie, when he said, "I don't care about Gucci, I don't care about Tiffany."
It just shows
essentially, I don't care about the very folks who feed the revenues to this city to do what I want to do.
And who employ working class people. I mean, that was among the most idiotic left-wing statements I've ever heard in my life. I mean, you know, it was, I don't care about a major employer in this city. Now, the good news is that President-elect Donald Trump is surrounding himself with a lot of free market people. You know, he's got some smart people in there. He's making a play, from what I understand. I just reported this on Fox Business, to bring J.P. Morgan chief Jamie Dimon, try to get him to be at least interested in some position. Jamie Dimon has offered himself up as an advisor, but he's still pushing him for Treasury Secretary. But Steve Mnuchin is a banker and a really smart guy that may be his Treasury Secretary as well. You got Wilbur Ross in there. You got Rudy Giuliani. We have free market people that are behind this new administration. That, you know, New York City may be run for at least another another couple of years by an avowed socialist who doesn't care about employers. But the country is changing, and I think that's a good thing.
All right, and they all account for a good deal of revenue the city
Absolutely.
gets. All right, Charlie Gasparino, thank you very, very much. All right, speaking of money, and at the corner of Wall and Broad, and so it ends. This is the first down day for the Dow since Donald Trump got elected a week ago. Now, a lot of people said it was just due to run out of steam because it had been going on so long. And if you count the worst we were down, election night, about 800 points, it was a huge comeback and turnaround for the corner of Wall and Broad. This might be a reason. Take a look at what was going on with interest rates. Even though stable today, the 10-year note, which a lot of mortgages are pegged to, now at around 2.25%. That has backed up since the election over 0.25%, largely on the view that economic activity is picking up. That's good news. But again, it also means that the Federal Reserve is more likely now, in the face of this, to hike interest rates next month. That's not a given. But again, Wall Street weighs, a little pickup in activity, higher rates. Does that slow the mortgage business? The whole drill. So they're confused and perplexed today, but still up substantially since Mr. Trump was elected a little over a week ago. All right, Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker always said, yeah, I think I could turn my state red, and I think I can deliver it for Donald Trump. He did. How he did it is amazing. He's next. All right, they're back. I'm not talking about legislators getting ready for the new season of leadership here. I'm talking about a House GOP plan. They're kicking back and forth the use of earmarks. They were very close to sort of nailing this down before Speaker Paul Ryan, we're told, said, why don't we bring this up with the president-elect and we'll pursue this matter a little later. Well, no sooner had Harry Reid heard that Republicans were looking at reinstating something that he loved, well, then he was off to the races. Listen to this.
I'm one of the kings of earmarks. I think it was a terrible disservice to America to come up with this stupid idea to stop congressional directed spending. Of course we should be doing it. It's a way we get things done around here, the way it was done for centuries. We have a constitutional obligation to do congressionally directed spending. I've never apologized to anybody. I go home and I boast about earmarks, and that's what everyone should do.
To boast about earmarks, that's boasting about finding all sorts of ways to spend and keep the gravy train growing. All right, Fox Business Network's Charles Payne. I'm surprised the subject's even coming up and that Republicans are the one kicking it around. But what do you make of this?
It's shocking. It is absolutely shocking. I'm as surprised as you are. I mean, we're talking about earmarks, which we had a moratorium on since 2011. Harry Reid's right. He has been unabashed, pushing this, extolling their virtues, saying, hey, if you don't want gridlock, put these goodies in. The problem with these goodies, how about 19.8 trillion and counting? Problem with these goodies is that we get the kind of government that has bogged this country down, that has bogged our economy down. And by the way, we just had an American public that overwhelmingly rejected the notion of Washington insiders doing these sort of deals, these cherry-picked deals, so that they can go back home, brag about bringing the pork and making the nation poor.
The argument for earmarks is that they're a means to an end, and that they can be used to sort of buy votes for, in this case, maybe wooing others to some of your big plans. So is this modern-day Republican group's plan to imitate what Ronald Reagan was doing in the early 1980s to win over Southern Democrats, the so-called Bo Weevils then? And he did, but he promised them a lot of stuff in the interim.
Neil, we're at the end of that gravy train, and the American public knows it. These. By the way, let's talk about the numbers. The peak, 2006 for earmarks, 15,800 of them, $72 billion. And by the way, it included an $18 million bridge near Harry Reid's 160-acre farm in Nevada, right? So the American public has said, we don't want this. They just spoke. It was just a week ago. They want the government to tighten its belt, free up money so that Main Street America has access to this cash, and they can grow this economy the right way, not this kind of way. I understand maybe there's some folks who think that you can get deals done, and of course you can, but what's the real cost of getting them done?
It's spending to really commit to bigger spending, right? Isn't that the argument they use, that it's sort of like a drug, and once you have it, left or right, it gets out of control.
It is absolutely amazing. It's, you know, sort of that old saying about power corrupting. This is power and money that corrupts and corrupts and corrupts, and it only gets worse. Imagine that, $72 billion in 2006. We don't want that right now, not in this country. We want these guys in Washington, D.C. to make decisions based on fiscal responsibility and ultimately how it empowers the entire country, not getting reelected because you brought home a bridge to nowhere.
All right. Thank you, Charles Payne. We'll see how the markets weigh all of this if it ever comes to fruition. In the meantime, you probably heard right now that Senator Barbara Boxer has a measure now to end once and for all the Electoral College system, arguing that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, and this is getting to be routine, and it's got to stop. The read from Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner. He's here. Senator, very good to see you.
Hey, Neil.
What do you make of what your colleague, Senator Boxer, wants to do? Just get rid of the Electoral College.
Well, listen, I think it'd be a worthwhile debate. I think, you know, Electoral College kind of favors one team over another depending on the election. When you start looking at 1 million, 2 million vote differential, I don't think, candidly, it's going to happen. But, you know, there might be a civics lesson in there for all Americans. We kind of think the winner takes all. And I would remind folks that back in 2012, Donald Trump actually suggested getting rid of the Electoral College and letting the popular vote reign. But
yeah, he still feels it. No, he actually still feels that way in an interview here. But, you know, obviously it's hard to say in retrospect if the two of them had been fighting a race to get the most popular vote. They would have fought a different race. So there's no way to say that this outcome would have been the same.
There's no, yeah.
And
we're never going to know.
Do you worry now? Virginia is obviously a pretty big and important state in and of itself, but that smaller states or those with smaller populations would be overlooked in such a scenario.
Well, let's face it, Neil. Virginia was never that competitive in presidential elections until 2008. We didn't see any presidential candidate for 40 years. So, and in this election, you didn't see presidential candidates going to, you know, Texas or California that much in terms of Trump or Clinton in unactive campaigning. So there's a lot of the country that's left out in this process. But I think,
but wouldn't you
frankly,
emphasize that all the more, sir? But if the Republican would try to go to Texas to run up the tally, the Democrat to California to run up the tally, or maybe parts of those urban areas where each was strong, right?
You might. I mean, and again, we don't know if they don't spend time and then in the so-called half dozen or dozen battleground states, what would mean in those states.
Right.
I think it's a worthwhile debate. I do think when the margins start into the millions and you get above 1 or 2% differential this year, it's not going to get to 1% differential, I don't think, then, you know, it's worthy of having a debate. But I guess, Neil, the point I want to make is I think this election was about a lot bigger things. And I think it was, yes, it was in many ways a repudiation of the Democrats, but it was also a repudiation of the Republican establishment. It was a repudiation of a lot of the media. It was a repudiation of most of the, you know, the corporate Fortune 500 CEOs, none who embraced Donald Trump. And I think those of us, particularly somebody like myself who've got a business background, we got to find a way to make modern American capitalism work for more people. I think some of the incentives have gotten out of line, and the options being offered by some on the far left on my side and some on the far right, I don't think that's where it's going to be. And, you know, we're not going to go back to an economy where everybody works in the same job for 40 years the way my dad did. And that means a fresh look at the social insurance system, probably portable benefits. It means looking at how we can get our businesses to think about long-term investments.
What you're doing right now, Senator, is actually the way to look forward, ways for Democrats and Republicans to work together. What I see going on with a lot of these protests, and they've continued and built up since the election last week, is that they're not accepting the results for whatever, you know, the electoral, the popular vote thing, back and forth. But even Hillary Clinton and President Obama have told people, honor these results, let's move on. They don't move on. And I'm wondering if that is doing lasting damage, not only to the president-elect, but potentially to all of you in Washington as you try to grapple with these issues.
Neil, you know, I think people got a right to protest, not violent protesting. I'm concerned about some of the reports coming out of Portland. Let's be honest with each other. I mean, Mr. Trump, before he was elected, potentially saying saying the system was rigged and be on guard. I believe if this election had gone the other way, we'd still be seeing protests against a President-elect Clinton. The vitriol
Well, don't you find it odd then that it's Democrats who had said that that would happen with Trump supporters if they lost, that they are the ones doing it?
Point made. But I think there were an awful lot of folks who felt that some of the language that candidate Trump used was kind of so far outside the norm.
But you, Senator Warner, would give him the benefit of the doubt and see what he does. And then if you're for protest, you could protest afterwards, right?
Well, listen, as somebody who expected it to go the other way and had reached out to a lot of my Republican colleagues saying, hey, let's find some common ground, the shoe's on the other foot, I owe an obligation to give him that same benefit of the doubt. And I hope he is going to put together an administration that's inclusive of all Americans. I am anxious to see, and you and I have talked about fiscal issues for a long time, how he's going to do this massive tax cut and potentially great new spending on infrastructure, which I'd support, and not raise that $19 trillion debt that we've already got in place. And I've talked to some of my friends in the House and the Freedom Caucus to say, hey, we all got to stay strong on debt and deficit. So, I'm anxious to see what he lays out. But I do think one of the things, as somebody who made the transference from business to government without ever being elected anything before I was governor, the words of a candidate versus the words of a president-elect, words of a candidate for governor versus the words of a governor are very different. And sometimes you can't run a government just the same way you would run a business. And I, again, wish him well, but I'm going to be watching kind of who he appoints and what kind of tone he takes.
All right, Senator, you've been consistent on these issues of worrying about deficits and debt. It is fair to say it's a little rich coming from some of your colleagues, though, who suddenly are concerned.
I think we could make that comment, Neil, about folks on both sides of the aisle. The debt and deficit crowd who's talked about tax reform and entitlement reform, but also new revenues.
I think it's fair to say though, that many in your party have been resistant to some of that. Now, I'm not saying it's all one way, but I am saying when I hear some super liberals talking about let's be fiscally responsible, I think
all you gotta grant me, Neil, is there's hypocrisy knows no bounds on either side of the aisle.
All right, sir. Very good having you. Thank you again.
Thanks, Neil.
Senator Warner. All right, Republicans also picked up a number of governorships. In fact, the most since 1922. That's pretty important. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, now the newly elected chairman of the Republican Governors Association. What that means for the party going forward and the country. Next. All right, if it's Wednesday, it must be protest day. Pretty much like every day since Donald Trump was elected at Rutgers, in New Jersey, at Columbia University, in New York City, and just outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the themes are pretty much the same. They're angry over those election results, even though they do express the will of the people. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, now the newly elected chairman of the Republican Governors Association, joining us out of Florida right now. Governor, very good to have you. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you.
What do you think of these ongoing protests? Because they just seem to escalate. Fortunately, in only a couple of cases have they turned really raucous and violent, largely in the Portland, Oregon area. But they're not stopping.
Right, and that's just great America. Obviously, I don't want the violence to occur, but when it comes to peaceful protests, that's the great thing about America. We're unlike just about anywhere else in the world, where you can have a transition of power from two very different viewpoints, and it's a peaceful process, and if people protest, so be it. Neil, as you know firsthand, having visited Wisconsin years ago, we had an awful lot of protests. In fact, I think it was almost 150,000 occupying our Capitol Square in Capitol at one point, but in the end, we made it through all of that, and there are more people employed in my state than ever before, a sign that if you withstand all the protests, you can move your state and your country forward.
You're being very sanguine about it, but the fact of the matter is those protests turned very ugly for you. I mean, there were death threats against you and your family. You got through that. But the fact of the matter is these things can escalate and get out of hand. You have broad swaths of people across the country now involving high school kids on both coasts who are saying that the duly elected President of the United States isn't legitimate. What do you think of that?
Well, again, it's you know, people can say and do anything as long as it doesn't threaten the law or the life and safety of others in this country. But I think the important thing is to make sure, and you mentioned it in the previous interview with Senator Warner, that you've got the president, you've got Secretary Clinton and others acknowledging, conceding that the election was won by Donald Trump and Mike Pence. And I think most people, regardless of party, are ready to move forward. They're ready to give him a chance. I think they should. I'm excited about the possibility to have a Republican president, Republican House, Republican Senate, and now 2 out of every 3 governors in America are Republicans. It's time for us to stand up and deliver, not just on the promises Donald Trump made, but that we as Republicans made in all of our races. And when we do, I think just like our states are much better than they were a few years ago, our country will be much better.
You know, I was thinking of you, Governor, and having dealt with protests and knowing what was at stake, even though you might have had personal differences at times with certain things that Donald Trump said, you were almost like a little mini Secretary of State, trying to keep the peace in the party, trying to deliver Wisconsin for Republicans. Wisconsin did go that route. But there's still a lot of angst out there among the mainstream Republicans who don't know what they're in for with a Donald Trump. Now, a lot less so now as victors than they would have been as losers. But what do you make of that? How difficult will this be for your party?
Oh, I think in the end, the Republican Party is alive and well, and it all began in the states. If you look at the map in my state, where we're at here with my friend Rick Scott in Florida, where we're having our meetings right now, and a number of the other battleground states where Donald Trump and Mike Pence carried the day last Tuesday, those are states that the maps are almost identical to the same areas of the states that we carried in 2010 and 2012 and again in 2014, similar to Rick Scott, Rick Snyder, John Kasich, you name it, a whole slew of Republican governors who I think kind of set the table for a Republican presidential candidate to win. And now, just as we did in Wisconsin, Kasich did in Ohio, Schneider's done in Michigan, Rick Scott's done here in Florida, Susana Martinez has done in New Mexico, you name it down the line. It's as I called it when I first came in. I said it's put up or shut up time. We've got to go big and we've got to go bold and we've got to do it early. That's why I think for a lot of us, it's not just the person. We're excited about the possibility of what can happen that will really transform this country going forward, not just in the short term, but for the long haul as well. And Republicans are going to be united, I think, overwhelmingly in seeing that go forward.
You know, it was not too long ago that Chris Christie held the position you just got elected to. And now it's been a spectacular fall from grace for him, Governor. I mean, where he loses his position on the transition team, his key people are kicked out. He was one of the earliest to support Donald Trump. What happened?
Well, you know, Chris and Mary Pat were with us the other day when Vice President-elect Mike Pence was with us. He still very much was on the same conference call that Governor, soon-to-be Vice President Pence was on. So I still think he's playing a role, and I think he's a talented guy. And
what if he doesn't get a cabinet position? What if he doesn't get anything? I mean, wow.
I don't know. You know, in the end, I'll wait and see. I always say actions speak louder than words. And whether he's on, I talked to Mike Pence the other day. I think they're going to put together a super cabinet. And I think there's a lot of excited people, including some who may have not been early supporters of Donald Trump, but as I just mentioned, are excited about the possibility. You know, Paul Ryan's got a better way plan. We've got great things happening in the states with our governors. We've got more than we've had at any point since 1922. And we're going to have an ally, I think, in the White House, not only in the vice president, who is a governor and will be shortly a former governor, but I think Donald Trump, talking to him, listening to Mike Pence talk about it, this is a person who really fundamentally believes that much of the power that's concentrated in Washington should be in the hands of the states, and more importantly, directed into the hands of the people. And if we do that, it'll be transformational.
All right, but another thing that's amazing to me, like you said, you know, election is over and whatever appear to be bygones are bygones, but when I saw Ted Cruz show up at the Trump Tower, I thought, man, oh man, I'm looking up where pigs flying, because that one few people saw. And the talk is that he could be entertained for Attorney General or some key post in a Trump administration. I mean, this is the guy Donald Trump called Lion Ted. What do you make of that?
Well, say what you will. I think one of the...
Oh, we just lost him here. I apologize for that. But again, to the governor's point here, very odd goings on at Trump Tower, where people who had a very nasty, acrimonious relationship with Donald Trump little more than just weeks ago, now being entertained for posts in his cabinet. And those that were very, very close to him and look well connected to him, i.e. Chris Christie, maybe not so much. It is amazing, politics, and it is a reminder how quickly things are changing. Is the governor there? Is he back with us? Governor, I'm going to take a huge risk here. I hope you can hear us. Can you?
Yeah.
All right.
It
I
must
apologize.
be the NSA kicking in, right?
There you go. So real quick on the Ted Cruz thing, were you surprised?
Yeah. You know, to me, one of the reasons why I think Donald Trump, as a business person, but long before this campaign had been successful building a brand, putting businesses together that employed tens of thousands of people, was the fact that he employs good people. He puts good people in his management team. It's why so many of his operations and businesses have been successful in the past. I mean, heck, you look at his children alone have had tremendous business careers as well. And to me, it's no surprise he's looking at putting the best and the brightest in his cabinet and his administration. So I think there's a lot of people, not only those who supported him early, but those who came along the way who want to be a part of a team, because it's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Republican in the White House, Republicans in charge of the House and the Senate, Republicans controlling 2/3 of all the governors in the country are now Republican. The possibilities to really transform this country and you know, one of the reasons why I think so many people came out for Donald Trump last week was a lot of voters feel like the rich get taken care of, the poor get taken care of, but everyday Americans get stuck with the bill. And if we work together and figure out a way to take care for everyday Americans who've been footing that bill in the past, but just want a little bit more freedom and a little bit more a chance to allow their children and grandchildren to live a better life, we're going to not only win future elections, we're going to have a much better country and certainly better states like Wisconsin.
Governor, thank you very, very much. Congratulations again. Very good talking to you.
Thank you, Neil.
Governor Scott Walker. All right, you know, when he was campaigning, Donald Trump has been blasting Saudi Arabia. In fact, this goes long before he was a candidate for anything. Now, some signs that the Saudis are worried.
They set the price of oil. If they did it in this country, it would be called an illegal deal. It would be illegal. They go to jail.
So you think they're deliberately colluding to do this?
Well, of course. It's OPEC. I mean, that's what they do.
But they must know from their past, Donald, if they overdo it, they can shoot themselves.
12 guys sitting around the table, and they are having an absolute field day because we have nobody to go and call and talk and say, fellas, you're not going to do it. If you do it, you got big, big problems. They wouldn't even be there except for us, Neil.
All right, think of that. That was more than 5 years ago, long before he entertained running for President of the United States. Now he's on his way to becoming President of the United States. And the Saudis are not one bit happy. Blake Berman on some very ominous signs from Riyadh. Blake.
President-elect Trump, of course, not the first person to question Saudi Arabia or OPEC when it comes to its motives for oil. But the presidential candidate during the election certainly upped the ante when he talked about the need for America to become energy independent. I want to turn your attention back to March. You might remember at that point, then candidate Trump said that he would halt the flow of Saudi oil imports into this country unless Saudi Arabia did one of two things. Either one, put troops on the ground in the fight against ISIS, or two, as he put it, quote, substantially reimburse the United States for taking on part of the fights for Saudi Arabia in that region. Well, it appears now that they have taken notice over there, because the energy minister for the kingdom gave an interview to the Financial Times in which he said the following, and I am quoting here: "At his heart, President-elect Trump will see the benefits, and I think the oil industry will also be advising him accordingly, that blocking trade in any product is not healthy." That appeared there to amount to a little bit of a warning. The energy minister also saying that he feels that the United States has, quote, benefited hugely from being able to sell oil in its own right. We looked at the figures a little while ago. The latest numbers come from 2015. And as it relates to oil imports in this country, we currently import a drop above 1 million barrels a day from Saudi Arabia. That is the second most country, and that is 11% of all oil imports. Neil, back to you.
Blake, thank you very much. Blake Berman in Washington. Well, you ever notice with this tit for tat and anger, the Saudis at us, and protests and demonstrations everywhere going on at schools and universities and high school kids? Why can't we just step back and look at the important things? Ainsley Earhardt did just that. A children's book that I think is just as effective for adults. She's next. All right, this is a novel effort for protest. These are kids, high school kids, right, Pam, in Florida, Miami, Florida, jumping the fence, presumably to protest. And then off they go to rant, rave about, Donald Trump, the new president-elect. This has been played out again and again, although kudos to these kids for their ingenuity here. But it's just happened across the country since the election, where the divisions are still real, the hatred is still pronounced, and depending on where you go, like in Portland, it's darn right dangerous. None of this is easing up. Enter my colleague and friend Ainsley Earhart. Take Heart, My Child. It's a mother's dream. And what makes this book and its timing so brilliant on her part, she planned this national disruption to be the environment for this, is we need it. It's a kid's book, but I don't think it's for kids. I think it's for everyone.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and thank you for having me on.
It's good to have you.
Well, thank you. And this morning we played some clips of you talking about advice that your dad and your parents had
they
given
were
you.
hysterical. I was watching what others were saying.
Yours was great.
But
we really
this was built originally on advice that you had gotten to, and you were writing this as you were pregnant.
That's right.
Well, you tell me. It was important to reach it.
So my mom's a school teacher, or was, for 33 years. So she had to be out the door at 7 a.m. I don't know how she did it now that I'm a mom myself, but she got 3 kids ready as she could before she had to go out the door and get herself ready. Come home, cook every night, take care of my dad. I mean, she's an amazing woman. My dad would wake us up in the morning with my mom's help, but she had to get out the door early. So dad had to feed us and get us on the school bus. So he would put little notes or scriptures or sayings next to our cereal bowl. And we were always like, Dad, really stop trying to teach us a lesson, just have a normal conversation.
I just want to eat.
We just want to eat and eat our Cheerios. But the messages really resonated with us, and we still talk about them today. I hope I'll never be afraid to fail. That was Walt Disney. Stay up with the owls. Don't expect to soar with the eagles. Nothing good happens after midnight. Attitude determines aptitude. I mean, he was always preaching these messages. He was a former basketball coach, so he was the coach of our family and always cared about everyone and character, and people can take things away from you, but they'll never be able to take away your character. You're in control of that and your reputation. So when I was meeting with the publicist, our publisher, Simon & Schuster, across the street, they were wonderful, and they said, we love your book about your dog. I went in to talk about my book about my dog, and they were like, tell us about your life. And I started telling them about my parents and how influential my dad was with these little messages. They're like, Ainsley, that's your book. It's not the dog.
Yeah.
This is what we need as a country.
But it's very peaceful. First, the artwork is stunning.
Amazing.
It's just stunning.
This is her first book, too, Neil.
Is it really?
Yeah, this is Jamie Kim. She's from North Carolina.
It's just beautiful. Just
She's
beautiful.
Great.
But you talk about today in the message, and there's so much anger going on. And people are disappointed. I remember you shared a story about your dad when you were cheerleading in the 7th grade, I guess, and then you didn't make it in the 8th grade. You were angry and bitter.
Yeah.
And he had a great message for you.
So Dad came into my room. I was crying in my bedroom, and he said, listen, God allowed you to be a cheerleader in 7th grade, and you're confident and you're going to be okay. But there are some other kids that need opportunities too, and there's spaces that came open, and they need a chance. You already got your chance in 7th grade, so you need to sacrifice your position for someone else in 8th grade that really needs that. You'll be fine, but there might be another kid that might not be so fine if she didn't have that opportunity, and her life might have taken a different course because she had such an awful time in 8th grade because she didn't feel accepted. So I thought, wow.
That would still be a tough sell for me.
Really?
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because listen,
come from a very altruistic family.
Hook, line,
but you're such a selfless person, and yet in the morning you work with 2 of the most selfish and egotistical people on the planet. Now, who do you distrust more, Kilmeade or Ducey?